The freezing wind cut through the empty train station platform like 1,000 knives, and Darren Nicholson had never seen anyone look so small and so lost as the young woman huddled against the depot wall in the winter twilight of January 1885. Fort Davis, Texas wasn't supposed to get this cold, but a rare winter storm had swept down from the mountains, turning the desert town into an icy wasteland that caught everyone by surprise. She wore nothing but a thin cotton dress and a shawl that might as well have been made of paper for all the good it did her, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that made Darren's heart clench with worry as he dismounted from his horse and strode toward her with purpose in every step. "Miss, you cannot stay out here," he said firmly, already shrugging out of his heavy sheepskin coat. "You will freeze to death before morning." She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and even through her violent shivering, he could see the wariness there, the instinct to refuse help from a stranger. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and whipped around her face in the bitter wind, and when she tried to speak, her teeth chattered so hard she could barely form words. "I am waiting for someone," she managed to say, wrapping her thin arms tighter around herself. "He said he would meet me here." Darren crouched down in front of her, draping his coat over her shoulders despite her weak protest. "How long have you been waiting?" "Since the train arrived at noon." Her voice cracked, and he saw tears threatening to spill over. "He promised he would be here. He sent me the ticket and everything. Said we would be married as soon as I arrived." Darren felt anger flare in his chest, not at her but at whatever man had left this woman stranded in a storm. He had seen this before, unfortunately. Men who advertised for brides and then got cold feet, or had lied about everything from the start. The station master had gone home hours ago, the waiting room locked up tight, and the temperature was dropping fast as full darkness approached. "Miss, I do not know who you were supposed to meet, but he is not coming today. Maybe he got caught in the storm somewhere, or maybe he is a coward, but either way, you cannot stay here." He stood and offered his hand. "You are coming home to warmth and to me, at least for tonight. I have a ranch about 3 miles outside town, a good fire, and my housekeeper makes the best stew in all of West Texas. In the morning, when this storm passes, we will figure out what happened to your intended." She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, and he could see her weighing her options. Trust a stranger or freeze to death. It was not much of a choice, but he understood her hesitation. He was a large man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he kept shorter than was fashionable and a scar along his jaw from a run-in with a longhorn 5 years back. He probably looked intimidating, but he hoped she could see the genuine concern in his eyes. "I am Darren Nicholson," he said gently. "I run cattle on the Double N Ranch. I am on the town council, and if you ask anyone in Fort Davis, they will tell you I am a decent man who would never harm a woman. But right now, I need you to trust me because I cannot leave you here to die." Something in his voice must have reached her, because she slowly placed her small, frozen hand in his and allowed him to pull her to her feet. She swayed immediately, and he caught her around the waist, steadying her. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he had first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features and lips that would probably be quite pretty when they were not blue with cold. "My name is Margaret Patterson," she whispered. "Everyone calls me Maggie." "Well, Miss Margaret Patterson, who everyone calls Maggie, let us get you somewhere warm before we both turn into ice sculptures." He kept his coat wrapped around her and guided her toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper. "Have you ever ridden a horse?" "Once or twice when I was a child." Her voice was getting weaker, and Darren knew he needed to move fast. He mounted first, then reached down and lifted her up in front of him with an ease that spoke of years of ranch work. She weighed next to nothing, and when he settled her against his chest, he could feel the tremors running through her entire body. He wrapped one arm securely around her waist and took up the reins with his other hand, urging Copper into a steady trot despite the icy conditions. The ride to the ranch felt like it took forever, though in reality it was probably less than 30 minutes. Darren kept Maggie pulled close against him, sharing his body heat and trying to shield her from the worst of the wind. She said nothing during the journey, and he began to worry that she might be slipping into the dangerous sleep that came before freezing to death. He kept talking to her, forcing her to stay conscious. "I have had the double N for 6 years now," he told her, his voice raised over the howling wind. "Started with just 100 head of cattle and a one-room cabin. Now I've got about 500 head, a proper ranch house, a barn, and 3 men who work for me year-round. We are not fancy, but we do all right. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, came out from San Francisco 10 years ago with her husband. He worked the railroad before he died 3 years back, and I hired her on because she needed work, and I needed someone to make sure I did not starve to death eating my own cooking." He felt Maggie shift slightly against him, and took that as a good sign that she was still alert enough to listen. The lights of the ranch house finally appeared through the swirling snow, and Darren felt relief wash over him. He had built the house himself, a sturdy 2-story structure with real glass windows and a wrap-around porch. Smoke poured from the stone chimney, promising warmth inside. Mrs. Chen must have heard the horse because the front door flew open before Darren could dismount. She was a small, efficient woman in her 50s with silver streaking her black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What have you brought home now?" she called out, already holding a lantern high to see better. "A woman nearly frozen to death," Darren called back. "Heat water for a bath and get some blankets warming by the fire." Mrs. Chen did not waste time with more questions. She disappeared back inside, and Darren carefully dismounted with Maggie still in his arms. Her shivering had subsided, which worried him more than if she had still been trembling. He carried her into the house, kicking the door shut behind him against the wind, and headed straight for the large stone fireplace that dominated the main room. The heat hit them like a wall, and Darren carefully set Maggie down in the big armchair closest to the fire. Mrs. Chen reappeared with an armful of quilts and began tucking them around the younger woman with practiced efficiency. "How long was she out in the cold?" Mrs. Chen asked, already checking Maggie's hands and feet for signs of frostbite. "At least 6 hours, maybe more." "She was waiting at the train station for someone who never showed." Darren ran a hand through his hair, scattering droplets of melted snow. "I could not leave her there." "Of course not. You did right bringing her here." Mrs. Chen looked up at him with approval in her dark eyes. "The bath water will be ready soon. In the meantime, we need to warm her up slowly. Too fast and we could do more harm than good." Darren nodded and moved to the sideboard where he kept the whiskey. He poured a small amount into a cup and added hot water from the kettle that always sat near the fire. Mrs. Chen helped Maggie sit up enough to sip the mixture, and slowly, color began to return to the younger woman's face. "Thank you," Maggie whispered, her voice rough. "I thought I was going to die." "You very nearly did." Mrs. Chen's tone was matter-of-fact but not unkind. "What on earth possessed you to wait outside in weather like this?" Maggie's eyes filled with tears, and Darren felt his chest tighten at the sight. "I had nowhere else to go. No money for a hotel, no family here, nothing. Just a letter from a man named Robert Sutherland who said he owned a store in town and wanted a wife. He sent me a train ticket from St. Louis and promised he would be waiting for me." Darren exchanged a glance with Mrs. Chen. Robert Sutherland runs the general store, he said slowly. He is married, has been for at least 15 years. His wife Dorothy is one of the nosiest women in town, and she would know if her husband had sent for a mail-order bride. The tears spilled over then, and Maggie pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. So it was all a lie, everything. Might not have been Sutherland at all, Mrs. Chen said gently. Might have been someone using his name. There are men who do that, prey on desperate women looking for a better life. I am sorry, dear. Darren felt rage building in his gut at the thought of someone deliberately deceiving Maggie like this. In the morning, I will go into town and talk to the sheriff. If someone is running a scheme like this, they need to be stopped before they hurt someone else. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, Maggie needed to recover from her ordeal. Mrs. Chen announced that the bath was ready and helped Maggie upstairs to the guest room. Darren took care of Copper, getting his horse brushed down and fed in the barn before returning to the house. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and he worried about his cattle, but his 3 ranch hands were experienced men who knew how to handle winter weather. They would make sure the animals were as protected as possible in the low valleys where they sheltered from the worst of the wind. When he came back inside, Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen ladling up bowls of thick beef stew. She is in the bath now, poor thing. I gave her one of my nightgowns and a robe. Her own clothes were so thin and worn I doubt they would have kept her warm even on a mild day. What do you make of her story? Darren asked, accepting a bowl and sitting at the large kitchen table. Mrs. Chen considered the question as she sat down across from him. I think she is exactly what she appears to be, a young woman alone in the world who took a chance on what looked like a decent opportunity and got taken advantage of. The question is, what do we do with her now? She stays here until this storm passes and she is fully recovered, Darren said firmly. After that, I suppose it depends on what she wants to do. If she wants to go back east, I will buy her a ticket. If she wants to stay in Fort Davis and make a life here, I will help her find work. You have a good heart, Darren Nicholson. Mrs. Chen smiled at him warmly. Sometimes too good, but in this case, I think you did exactly right. Maggie appeared in the doorway then, looking small and fragile in Mrs. Chen's oversized nightgown and robe. Her dark hair was damp and hung in waves past her shoulders, and the color had fully returned to her face. Darren found himself thinking that Mrs. Chen had been right earlier. Maggie was quite pretty when she was not half frozen to death. Come sit and eat, Mrs. Chen said, already rising to get another bowl. You must be starving. Maggie sat down carefully as if she was afraid of imposing too much. I cannot thank you both enough. If Mr. Nicholson had not found me, I would surely be dead by now. Just Darren, please, and you do not need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same. He paused. Though I will admit, I am curious how you ended up in Fort Davis of all places. As they ate, Maggie told her story. She had grown up in St. Louis, the youngest of 7 children. Her parents had died in a cholera outbreak 2 years ago, and her older siblings had families of their own to worry about. She had been working as a seamstress, but the wages were barely enough to pay for a room in a boarding house, and she had known that life offered her nothing but slow, grinding poverty. When she saw an advertisement from a Texas merchant looking for a wife, it had seemed like a sign from God. He wrote such lovely letters, she said softly, staring into her bowl. Talked about building a life together, about wanting a partner and not just a housekeeper. He sent money for new clothes and the train ticket. It all seemed so real. The money was real enough, Darren said. Someone went to considerable expense to bring you out here. The question is why? What did they gain from it? Maybe they get some kind of sick pleasure from it, Mrs. Chen suggested darkly. Some people are cruel just for the sake of being cruel. They talked late into the evening, the storm raging outside while the fire kept them warm and safe inside. Darren found himself fascinated by Maggie's stories of life in St. Louis, so different from his own experiences growing up on a small ranch in South Texas, before striking out on his own. She was intelligent and well-spoken, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once she felt more comfortable. By the time Mrs. Chen declared it was time for everyone to get some sleep, Darren realized he had enjoyed himself more than he had in months. He lay awake in his own bed later, listening to the wind howl and thinking about the woman sleeping in his guest room. He was 31 years old and had always been too busy building his ranch to think much about marriage or family. There had been a girl when he was younger, but she had married a shopkeeper in San Antonio, and as far as he knew was happy with her choice. Since then, he had convinced himself he was content with his life as it was. But something about Maggie had stirred feelings he thought he had buried long ago. The way she had trusted him enough to come home with him, despite having every reason to be wary of strangers. The strength it must have taken to leave everything she knew and travel halfway across the country for a chance at a better life. The quiet dignity with which she had accepted her situation, even when it became clear she had been deceived. Darren told himself not to be a fool. She had been through an ordeal and needed help, not some rancher developing inappropriate feelings for her. In the morning, he would go to town, talk to the sheriff, and figure out what could be done to help her. That was all. Nothing more, but when morning came and he found Maggie in the kitchen helping Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast, wearing one of the housekeeper's simple dresses and with her hair braided back from her face, his heart did a strange little flip in his chest that he could not quite explain away. The storm had passed during the night, leaving Fort Davis buried under 6 inches of snow, an almost unheard of amount for West Texas. Everything glittered in the bright morning sun, beautiful and treacherous at the same time. Darren knew the roads into town would be a mess, but he needed to follow through on his promise to visit the sheriff. "I am riding into Fort Davis," he announced. "With any luck, I will be back by early afternoon." "Be careful," Mrs. Chen said. "The cold will make the horses skittish." Maggie looked up from the biscuits she was helping to form. "Will you really talk to the sheriff about what happened to me? I gave you my word, did I not?" Darren met her eyes and was startled by the hope he saw there. If someone is running a scheme preying on women, they need to be stopped. And if it really was Robert Sutherland, then he needs to answer for what he did to you. "I do not want to cause trouble," Maggie said softly. "You are not causing anything. Whoever did this caused the trouble. You are just the victim." Darren grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "Stay warm and do not worry. We will figure this out." The ride into town took longer than usual with the snow making everything difficult, but Copper was sure-footed and got him there safely. Fort Davis was a small town, barely 500 people, built up around the old military fort that had given the area its name. The fort itself was still active, though much smaller than it had been during the Indian Wars. Now it mostly served as a way station for travelers and a garrison for a company of Buffalo soldiers who patrolled the region. Darren went straight to the sheriff's office, a small stone building on Main Street. Sheriff William Tucker was a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Fort Davis for over a decade. He looked up when Darren walked in, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Darren Nicholson, as I live and breathe, what brings you to town in weather like this?" "Got a situation I need your help with, Will." Darren took off his hat and shook the melting snow from it. "Found a woman nearly frozen to death at the train station yesterday evening. She came here thinking she was going to marry Robert Sutherland." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "Sutherland?" but he is already married. That is what I told her. She had letters and a train ticket, all supposedly from Sutherland. Someone went to a lot of trouble to lure her here, and I want to know who and why." Sheriff Tucker leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That is strange indeed. You think someone might be impersonating local men to trick women into coming out here? I do not know what to think, but it smells wrong. The woman, her name is Maggie Patterson. She used up everything she had to make this trip. She is stranded here now with no money and no prospects, all because someone lied to her. Where is she now? At my ranch. Mrs. Chen is looking after her." Darren met the sheriff's eyes steadily. "I intend to help her however I can, but first I want to know who is responsible for this." "Let me talk to Sutherland," the sheriff said, rising from his desk. "Come with me. If someone has been using his name for something like this, he needs to know about it." They walked together down Main Street to Sutherland's General Store, a large building that sold everything from farming equipment to ladies' dress fabric. Robert Sutherland was behind the counter, a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and a perpetually worried expression. His wife Dorothy stood nearby, rearranging a display of canned goods with the single-minded intensity she brought to everything. "Sheriff Darren, what can I do for you gentlemen?" Sutherland asked cheerfully. "Need to ask you a question, Robert," the sheriff said. "Have you been corresponding with any women back east, maybe advertising for a wife?" Sutherland's face went pale, and Dorothy spun around with a dangerous gleam in her eye. "What?" she demanded. "Robert Henry Sutherland, what is this about?" "Nothing. I have not been corresponding with anyone." Sutherland looked genuinely panicked. "Dorothy, you know I would never. Someone has been using your name," Darren interrupted before Dorothy could work up to a full fury. "They convinced a young woman to come all the way from St. Louis believing she was going to marry you. She nearly froze to death waiting at the station yesterday because the person who sent for her never showed up." Sutherland's face went from pale to red. "That is outrageous. Who would do such a thing?" "That is what we are trying to figure out," Sheriff Tucker said. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anyone asking questions about you, or maybe someone accessing your personal correspondence?" Sutherland thought for a moment, then his eyes widened. "There was something about 3 months back. I had some letters go missing from my office in the back room. I thought maybe I had misfiled them, but what if someone stole them? They could have copied my handwriting, used my personal stationery." "Who has access to your office?" the sheriff asked. "Just me and Dorothy and the boy we hired to help with inventory. Name is Samuel Wright, came to town about 6 months ago looking for work." Sutherland paused. "Actually, now that I think about it, he left town rather suddenly about 2 weeks back. Said his mother was sick back in Kansas and he had to go care for her." Darren and the sheriff exchanged glances. "That is quite a coincidence," Darren said. "Young man works here just long enough to gain your trust, steals some letters, and then disappears right around when Maggie would have been making her journey." "But what was the point?" Dorothy asked, her anger forgotten in the face of this mystery. "What did he gain from bringing some poor girl all the way out here for nothing?" That was the question, and nobody had a good answer. The sheriff promised to send telegrams to other towns along the rail line, seeing if anyone else had reported similar schemes. Darren left the store feeling frustrated that they were no closer to understanding what had happened or why. He stopped by the bank to withdraw some money, then visited the dress shop run by Mrs. Adelaide Monroe, a widow who made fine clothing for the women of Fort Davis. He explained the situation, leaving out Maggie's name to protect her privacy, and asked Mrs. Monroe to put together a few simple but practical dresses for a young woman of modest means who had lost her luggage. Mrs. Monroe, who had a kind heart beneath her businesslike exterior, promised to have something ready within a few days and charged him far less than the clothing was worth. By the time Darren headed back to the ranch, he had spent more money than he probably should have, but he felt good about it. Maggie needed clothes and basic supplies, and he had the means to provide them. It was the right thing to do, nothing more than simple Christian charity. He kept telling himself that, as he rode home through the melting snow, trying to ignore the little voice in his head that whispered he was far more interested in Maggie Patterson than simple charity required. When he arrived back at the Double Inn, he found Maggie outside on the front porch, bundled up in one of Mrs. Chen's heavy shawls and watching the sun sparkle on the snow-covered landscape. She turned when she heard his horse, and the smile that lit up her face made his heart do that strange flip again. "You are back," she said, stating the obvious. "I was starting to worry. The roads were slow, but Copper got me there and back safely." He dismounted and led the horse toward the barn. "I have news if you want to hear it." Maggie followed him, her borrowed boots crunching in the snow. "Please, tell me everything." As he unsaddled Copper and brushed him down, Darren related everything he had learned in town. Maggie listened intently, her gray eyes thoughtful. "So Robert Sutherland had nothing to do with it," she said when he finished. "I suppose that is a relief in a way. At least he is not some terrible person who deceives women for sport." "No, but Samuel Wright might be if he is the one behind this." Darren hung up the saddle and turned to face her. "The sheriff is investigating, but it might be weeks before we know anything for certain. In the meantime, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. Mrs. Chen appreciates the help in the house, and God knows I could use someone with a good head on their shoulders around this place." "You have been so kind," Maggie said softly. "Both you and Mrs. Chen. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay anything. Just get your strength back and figure out what you want to do with your life. That is payment enough." He meant it, but he also found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, what she would want to do was stay. The days that followed fell into an easy routine. Maggie proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, helping Mrs. Chen with cooking and cleaning, mending clothes, and even learning how to churn butter and make cheese. Darren found excuses to spend more time at the house instead of out on the range, telling himself he was just making sure Maggie was settling in all right. Mrs. Chen saw right through him, of course. One evening when Maggie had gone upstairs early, the housekeeper cornered Darren in the kitchen with a knowing look. "You are falling for her," she said bluntly. It was not a question. Darren felt heat rise in his face. "I am just trying to help someone in need." Hum. "And I suppose that is why you spent half your savings buying her new clothes, and why you cannot seem to stop smiling whenever she is in the room." Mrs. Chen: "Oh, hush. I am not criticizing you. That girl is good and kind and exactly the sort of person you need in your life. But you should know that she is falling for you too. The way she watches you when you come in from the range, the way she lights up when you tell your stories at dinner. If you have feelings for her, Darren, you should tell her before someone else comes along and sweeps her off her feet." "She just got here," Darren protested weakly. "She has been through a terrible ordeal. The last thing she needs is me pressuring her with unwanted attention." "Who says it would be unwanted?" Mrs. Chen patted his arm gently. "Just think about it. Life is short, and chances at real happiness do not come along every day." Darren did think about it, probably too much. He lay awake at night imagining what it would be like to have Maggie in his life permanently, not as a guest, but as his wife. He pictured coming home to her smile every evening, working side by side to build the Double N into something even greater, maybe even starting a family. But every time he considered actually telling her how he felt, fear stopped him. What if she said no? What if she was only being friendly because she felt obligated after everything he had done for her? What if she still dreamed of going back to St. Louis and the life she had known? 2 weeks after that first frozen night at the station, Mrs. Monroe sent word that the dresses were ready. Darren drove the wagon into town with Maggie beside him, the first time she had left the ranch since her arrival. She was quiet on the journey, and he wondered what she was thinking. "Are you nervous about going back to Fort Davis?" he asked gently. Maggie shook her head. "Not nervous exactly. I suppose I am just facing the reality of my situation. I cannot impose on your hospitality forever, Darren. I need to figure out what I am going to do with my life." His hands tightened on the reins. "You are not imposing. I meant what I said. You are welcome at the Double N for as long as you want to stay. But I cannot just live off your charity forever," she said quietly. "I need to earn my own way. I was thinking maybe I could find work in town, perhaps as a seamstress or in one of the hotels." The thought of Maggie leaving the ranch made Darren's chest ache, but he kept his voice level. "If that is what you want, I will help you however I can, but there is no rush. Take your time to figure things out." They spent the morning in Fort Davis, and Darren introduced Maggie to several of the townspeople. Everyone was kind to her, and more than one person offered potential work opportunities. Mrs. Monroe's dresses fit perfectly. Simple but well-made garments in practical colors that suited Maggie's coloring beautifully. When she came out of the fitting room wearing a deep blue wool dress with black trim, Darren felt his breath catch at how lovely she looked. "You clean up nice, Miss Patterson," he said, trying to keep his tone light. She blushed and looked down at herself. "It has been a long time since I had anything new to wear. Mrs. Monroe does beautiful work." They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, and then Darren took Maggie to meet Sheriff Tucker so she could give her official statement about what had happened. The sheriff had news for them. "I heard back from the sheriff in San Antonio," he said, pulling out a telegram. "Seems there have been at least 3 other cases similar to yours, Miss Patterson. Women lured out west with promises of marriage, only to find the man they were supposed to marry did not exist or knew nothing about it. In one case, the woman was robbed when she arrived at the station. In another, she disappeared entirely and has not been seen since." Maggie went pale. "You mean I might have been in even more danger than I realized?" "It is possible. We still do not know what the end game is for whoever is running this scheme. You were lucky that Darren found you when he did." The sheriff looked at Darren with approval. "Real lucky." As they drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Maggie was quiet again, and Darren could tell she was troubled by what the sheriff had said. "You are safe now," he said firmly. "Whatever these people were planning, they failed. You are under my protection, and I will not let anything happen to you." She turned to look at him, and he was startled by the intensity in her gray eyes. "Why are you doing all this for me, Darren? You do not even know me. I am just some stranger who stumbled into your life by accident." He brought the wagon to a stop on the empty road, the ranch visible in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and in that moment he decided to take Mrs. Chen's advice and tell the truth. "You are not just some stranger, Maggie. Maybe you were at first, but not anymore. These past 2 weeks, having you at the ranch, talking with you over dinner, watching you find your place there, it has made me realize how lonely I was before you came. I know it is too soon, and I know you have been through hell, but I need you to know that I care about you, more than I probably should." Maggie's eyes widened, but she did not pull away. "Darren, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted quickly. "I am not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know that you will always have a place at the Double N, not because I pity you, but because I want you there, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." There was a long moment of silence, and then Maggie reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm in his, and when she spoke, her voice trembled with emotion. "I thought I was alone in feeling this way. Every night I lie awake thinking about how lucky I was that you found me, and how much I have come to care for you. You are nothing like the man I thought I was coming to Texas to marry. You are better. You are kind and generous, and you treat me like an equal, not like some burden you have to bear. But I was afraid to say anything because I thought you were just being charitable." Darren felt hope bloom in his chest. "So you care for me too?" "More than care," she said softly. "I think I am falling in love with you, Darren Nicholson. Maybe I am a fool for it, but I cannot help how I feel." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then we are both fools together, because I am falling in love with you too, Maggie Patterson." The kiss that followed was soft and sweet, tentative at first, and then growing more sure as they both gave in to the feelings that had been building between them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Darren felt happier than he could remember being in years. "So what happens now?" Maggie asked, a hint of shyness in her voice. "Now we take things slow and see where this goes," Darren said. "We court properly, get to know each other better, and if we still feel the same way in a few months, well, maybe we talk about making things permanent." "How does that sound?" "It sounds perfect," Maggie said, and the joy in her eyes made him fall even harder. They drove the rest of the way to the ranch holding hands, and when they walked into the house together, Mrs. Chen took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "About time," was all she said, but there was deep satisfaction in her voice. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Darren's life. He courted Maggie properly, taking her on picnics when the weather warmed, teaching her to ride a gentle mare named Daisy, showing her every corner of the Double N, and sharing his dreams for the future. She told him more about her life in St. Louis, the good and the bad, and he shared stories of growing up on his family's small ranch, of losing his parents to a fever when he was 25, of the hard years building the Double N from nothing. They discovered they both loved reading and spent many evenings by the fire taking turns reading aloud from the books in Darren's modest library. They found they shared a similar sense of humor and could make each other laugh even after the longest, hardest days. They learned each other's moods and habits, the little things that made each of them happy or upset, and through it all, their love deepened and grew stronger. The people of Fort Davis accepted Maggie as one of their own, and she quickly made friends among the townswomen. She occasionally helped Mrs. Monroe with sewing projects, earning a bit of her own money that she saved carefully. Darren knew she valued her independence, and he respected that even as he longed to give her everything she might need or want. In late April, Sheriff Tucker finally got word about Samuel Wright. The young man had been arrested in El Paso trying to run the same scheme on another woman. Under questioning, he admitted to targeting women back east, promising them marriage and then robbing them when they arrived in isolated locations. Maggie, it turned out, had been saved by pure chance. Wright had intended to meet her at the station after dark and steal what little money and possessions she had, but the unexpected storm had kept him away. When he saw Darren take Maggie away on his horse, he had panicked and fled town immediately. "He is going to prison for a long time," the sheriff told them when Darren and Maggie came to town to hear the news. "You helped us catch a dangerous criminal, Miss Patterson. Those other women and their families owe you a debt of gratitude." Maggie just shook her head. "I am just grateful it is over. Now I can stop looking over my shoulder and wondering if whoever did this might come back." That evening, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, Darren knew it was time to ask the question that had been burning in his heart for weeks. Maggie, I know we said we would take things slow, but I cannot wait any longer. These past few months have been the best of my life, and every day I fall more in love with you. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, if you will let me. He pulled out a simple gold band he had bought from the jeweler in Fort Davis, a single small diamond sparkling in the fading light. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks, but she was smiling as she threw her arms around his neck. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Darren sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force of fate had brought Maggie into his life. They were married in June of 1885 in a small ceremony at the Fort Davis church. Mrs. Chen stood up with Maggie, and Darren's foreman, a grizzled cowboy named Pete Harrison, served as his best man. The whole town turned out for the celebration, and the party lasted well into the night with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. But the best moment came later, when they were finally alone in the ranch house that was now truly their home. Darren carried Maggie over the threshold, and she laughed with pure joy. I cannot believe this is real, she said, cupping his face in her hands. A year ago I was alone and struggling to survive in St. Louis. Now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, living in this beautiful place with a future full of possibilities. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, then I never want to wake up, Darren said, and kissed his wife as the moon rose over the Texas desert. Their first year of marriage was full of the usual adjustments and compromises that came with two people learning to share their lives, but it was also full of love and laughter. Maggie took to ranch life like she had been born to it, learning to help with the cattle, managing the household accounts with a skill that impressed even Darren, and winning over his ranch hands with her kindness and good humor. Mrs. Chen remained with them, but she scaled back her duties as Maggie took over more of the running of the house. The two women developed a close friendship, and Darren often found them in the kitchen together, talking and laughing as they worked. In the spring of 1886, Maggie discovered she was pregnant. Darren was beside himself with joy and worry in equal measure, suddenly terrified that something might happen to her or the baby. Maggie bore his hovering with good humor, gently teasing him when he tried to keep her from doing anything more strenuous than sitting in a chair. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she reminded him. I am healthy and strong, and I am not going to break just because I am carrying a child. Their son was born in November of 1886, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Daniel, and Darren thought his heart might burst with pride and love the first time he held his son in his arms. He is perfect, he whispered to Maggie as she lay exhausted but smiling in their bed. You are perfect. I am the luckiest man alive. We are both lucky, Maggie said softly, watching her husband cradle their baby with infinite gentleness. Lucky that you were at that train station on that freezing night. Lucky that you saw me and decided to help. Lucky that we found each other. Darren thought back to that night, to the young woman shivering in the cold who had looked so lost and alone. He thought about how close she had come to dying, how if he had been even an hour later, he might have found only a frozen body instead of the woman who would become his wife. It was enough to make him shudder. I thank God every day that I found you, he said, that I had the sense to stop and that you trusted me enough to come home with me. You saved my life that night, Maggie said, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a purpose, a family. You gave me love when I thought I would never find it. How could I not trust you? The years that followed brought more joy and occasional challenges, as all lives do. They had two more children, a daughter named Molly in 1888 and another son named Joseph in 1891. The double N continued to prosper under Darren's careful management and Maggie's sharp business sense. They expanded their land holdings, improved their herd, and became one of the most successful ranches in all of West Texas. Mrs. Chen remained with them until she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1893. They mourned her deeply, but celebrated the life she had lived and the love she had shown them. Maggie took over all the household duties she had once shared with the older woman, and they hired a young woman from town to help with the children and the heavy cleaning. The children grew up healthy and happy, learning to ride and rope and help with the ranch work. Daniel proved to have his father's way with cattle, while Molly showed an unexpected talent for training horses. Joseph was still too young to know what his gifts might be, but he was a cheerful, curious child who brought laughter to their home every day. On a cold January evening in 1895, exactly 10 years after that fateful night at the train station, Darren and Maggie stood together on the front porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The children were inside with their nanny, their voices carrying through the open window as they played before bedtime. "You ever think about how different your life might have been if I had not stopped at that station?" Darren asked, pulling Maggie close against his side. "All the time," she admitted. "I would probably be dead, or if I had somehow survived that night, I might have ended up in some terrible situation trying to earn money to get back east. Instead, I have everything I ever dreamed of and things I never dared to dream. I have a husband who loves me, beautiful children, a home that is truly mine, and a purpose to my life. I used to think I was complete before you came along," Darren said quietly. "I had my ranch and my work, and I thought that was enough, but you showed me what I was missing. You gave me a family and a future and a reason to build something that would outlast me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Maggie Nicholson." She turned in his arms and kissed him softly. "And you are mine, Darren. My cowboy who saw me shivering at the station and told me I was coming home to warmth and to him. You kept that promise. You gave me warmth and love and a home in your heart. I could not ask for anything more." They stood there as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, holding each other and listening to the sounds of their children playing inside. The wind that had nearly killed Maggie 10 years ago was just a gentle breeze now, carrying the scent of sage and the distant lowing of cattle. Life was not always easy on the ranch. There were droughts and hard winters, market crashes and sick animals, all the usual trials that came with making a living off the land. But through it all, they had each other. When times were tough, they worked together to find solutions. When times were good, they celebrated together and counted their blessings. As the years passed, Darren and Maggie watched their children grow into fine young adults. Daniel took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. Molly married a young Army officer from the fort in 1908 and moved to San Antonio, but visited often with her growing family. Joseph developed a passion for law and went east to study, eventually returning to Fort Davis to open a practice that served the whole region. In 1910, on their 25th wedding anniversary, Darren and Maggie renewed their vows in the same church where they had been married. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, along with friends from all over West Texas who came to celebrate with them. At the party afterward, Darren gave a toast that left hardly a dry eye in the room. "25 years ago, I married a woman I had known for only 5 months," he said, his arm around Maggie's waist. "Some people said we were rushing into things, that we did not know each other well enough. But I knew from the moment I saw Maggie shivering at that train station that she was someone special. I knew it when she trusted me enough to come home with a stranger. I knew it when she faced her terrible situation with courage and grace. And I have known it every single day since then as I have watched her build this life with me. She is my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Here is to 25 more years, and then another 25 after that, God willing. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Maggie kissed her husband with all the love and passion of their wedding night, not caring that they had an audience. "I love you, Darren Nicholson," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for seeing me that night. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for bringing me home. Thank you for trusting me," he whispered back. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." As they danced together in the center of the room, surrounded by the family and community they had created, Darren thought back to that young man who had been riding home from town on a freezing January evening in 1885. That young man had been content with his life, or so he thought. He had his land and his cattle and his work, and he believed that was enough. How wrong he had been. How empty his life would have been if he had ridden past that station without stopping, if he had ignored the young woman huddling against the wall, if he had told himself it was not his problem and someone else would help her. But he had stopped. He had seen her, really seen her, and recognized that she needed help. And in helping her, in bringing her home to warmth and to himself, he had found the missing piece of his own life. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the changes that time always brings. Fort Davis grew and modernized, the old fort eventually closing as the frontier era truly ended. Automobiles appeared on the roads, and electricity came to town, though the Double N remained reliant on lanterns and generators for many years. The world changed around them, but the love between Darren and Maggie remained constant. In 1920, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had done 1,000 times before, Darren took Maggie's hand and marveled at how time had marked them both. Her dark hair was liberally streaked with silver now, and his own had gone almost completely gray. Their hands were marked with the calluses and scars of decades of hard work, and their faces showed the lines of years spent squinting into the bright Texas sun. But when she smiled at him, he still saw the young woman who had trusted him enough to climb onto his horse on that frozen night 35 years ago. And when he kissed her, she still felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time his lips touched hers. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked her as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Maggie was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Only one," she said finally. "I regret that I spent so many years in St. Louis being miserable and alone when I could have been here with you. But then I remember that if I had not been miserable enough to answer that false advertisement, I never would have ended up at that station, and you never would have found me. So perhaps even that was not truly a regret, but just part of the path that led me home. I used to be angry at Samuel right for what he did to you," Darren admitted. "But in a twisted way, his greed and cruelty gave me the greatest gift of my life. Does that make me a terrible person?" "No, it makes you human," Maggie said gently. "We can acknowledge that something terrible brought us together while still being grateful for what we found in each other. The important thing is that you chose to help me when you could have ridden on by. You chose kindness when you could have looked away. That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, their hands linked together as they had been for over 3 decades. Inside the house, they could hear their granddaughter playing the piano, practicing a piece for her upcoming recital. Daniel and his wife would be coming for dinner tomorrow, and Joseph was bringing his family for a visit next week. The house would be full of noise and laughter and life, just as it had been for all these years. This was what happiness looked like, Maggie thought. Not a single perfect moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together like pearls on a string. The big moments of births and weddings and anniversaries, but also the small, everyday moments of shared meals and quiet conversations and simple companionship. It was waking up next to the same person for 35 years and still feeling grateful every single morning. It was knowing that no matter what challenges life brought, you would face them together. Darren pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and leather and the outdoors. This man who had saved her life had given her so much more than she ever could have imagined. He had given her a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that had sustained her through every joy and sorrow, and she had given him the same in return. She had taken his lonely ranch house and filled it with warmth and laughter. She had stood beside him through droughts and disasters, celebrated his triumphs and comforted him through his losses. She had given him children and grandchildren, a legacy that would continue long after they were both gone. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them all those years ago. "I will always love you." "And I love you," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "From that first moment I saw you at the station until my last breath, you will always be the one for me." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life more beautiful than either could have dreamed. The wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the sounds and scents of the land they loved, and they knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, always together, in the home that had started with a simple act of kindness on a freezing winter night and grown into something precious and enduring. A love story that began with a cowboy who saw a woman shivering at a station and told her she was coming home to warmth and to him. A promise he had kept every single day since, and a promise that would echo through the generations to come, a testament to the power of compassion, trust, and love. Darren and Maggie lived well into their 80s, rare for their time but perhaps not surprising for two people who had found such happiness together. They remained active on the ranch until their final years, always involved in the operations and the lives of their expanding family. They became beloved figures in Fort Davis, known for their generosity and the example they set of a true partnership in marriage. When Darren finally passed away in the spring of 1932, with Maggie holding his hand and surrounded by 3 generations of family, his last words were about that frozen night in 1885. "Best decision I ever made," he whispered, his eyes on Maggie's face. "Stopping at that station, finding you, bringing you home." Maggie lived for 2 more years, and though she missed her husband terribly, she found comfort in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her final years writing down the story of their life together, wanting future generations to know how their family had begun. She wanted them to understand that love could come from the most unexpected places, and that a single act of kindness could change the course of multiple lives. When she joined Darren in the family cemetery on a hill overlooking the Double N in the fall of 1934, the funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the couple. Their children read from Maggie's memoir, sharing the story of how a cowboy had seen a woman shivering at a train station and made a choice that would echo through time. The Double N continued under Daniel's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The house where Darren and Maggie had raised their family remained standing, preserved by each generation as a tribute to the love story that had started everything. Visitors could still see the porch where they had courted, the kitchen where they had shared countless meals, and the bedroom where their children had been born. And in the family Bible, carefully preserved in a place of honor, was pressed between its pages a simple gold band with a single small diamond, along with a faded photograph of a young couple on their wedding day. The man was tall and strong, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The woman was delicate, but with strength evident in her bearing, looking up at her husband with undisguised love. Below the photograph, in Maggie's careful handwriting, were the words that summed up their entire story. He saw me shivering at the station and told me I was coming home to warmth and to him. He kept that promise every day of our life together. This is what true love looks like. And so the story lived on, passed down through the generations, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when everything seems lost, love can find a way. It might come in the form of a stranger on a freezing night, offering his coat and his protection. It might start with a simple act of human kindness that blossoms into something beautiful and lasting. The Wild West was a hard place, full of danger and difficulty, where survival often seemed more important than softer emotions. But Darren and Maggie had proven that love could thrive even in the harshest environments, that it could grow from the smallest seed into something strong enough to last a lifetime and beyond. Their story became part of the folklore of Fort Davis, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But unlike many legends, every word of it was true. The frozen night, the cowboy on his horse, the woman who trusted a stranger, the love that grew between them, the family they built, and the legacy they left behind. All of it was real, documented in letters and photographs and the memories of those who had known them. And if you visit Fort Davis today, locals might tell you that on cold winter nights, you can sometimes see the ghost of a cowboy on horseback stopping at the old train station, as if still searching for someone in need of help. And beside him appears the figure of a woman in a thin dress, though she is no longer shivering because she has found her warmth at last, found her home, found her love. It is probably just a story, the kind of romantic tale small towns like to tell about their history. But then again, maybe some loves are so strong that they leave an imprint on the world, a reminder to future generations that kindness matters, that compassion can change lives, and that true love, when you find it, is worth holding on to with everything you have. Darren and Maggie would have liked that idea, that their story could continue to inspire and bring hope to others long after they were gone. That the choice he made on that freezing night in 1885 would ripple forward through time, touching lives they would never meet, but who would somehow feel the warmth of the love they had shared. Because that is what love does. It spreads. It grows. It touches others and inspires them to be kinder, to be braver, to be more willing to help a stranger in need. It reminds us that we are all connected, that every choice we make has consequences we cannot foresee, and that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change the world. A cowboy saw a woman shivering at a station and told her she was coming home to warmth and to him. And in doing so, he created a legacy of love that would last forever, proof that even in the wild and untamed West, the human heart remained capable of the most beautiful and enduring of emotions. Their story was complete, their love fulfilled, their lives lived to the fullest measure, and their ending the happiest that any two people could hope for, surrounded by love and leaving behind a family that would carry their memory forward into the future, a testament to the power of one choice made with kindness on one frozen night long ago.